to chapter 18 of our Gospel of John study here at Cedar Grove United Methodist Church. I'm Pastor Brian Boley. Today's reading, chapter 18, begins as Judas and the guards come to arrest Jesus. This version is the New International Version. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said. And Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go." This happened so the words he had spoken would be fulfilled, "I have not lost one of those you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Then the detachment of soldiers, with its commander and the Jewish officials, arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" she asked Peter. He replied, "I am not." It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. "I have spoken openly to the world," Jesus replied. "I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said." When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" he demanded. "If I said something wrong," Jesus replied, "testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself, so they asked him, "You aren't one of his disciples too, are you?" He denied it, saying, "I am not." One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him, "Didn't I see you with him in the garden?" Again Peter denied it, and at that moment a rooster began to crow. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." But we have no right to execute anyone, they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea," Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king, then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him, but it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. We go back to the beginning. When Jesus had finished the prayer, which is chapter 17, Jesus left his disciples and he crossed over the Kidron Valley, which is a valley that has a small occasional brook in it. On the other side, there was a garden, which we know from Matthew and Mark was called the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus and his disciples went into it. Judas knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So he comes to the garden bringing soldiers and officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they come there with torches and lanterns because it's the middle of the night, and weapons. So Jesus goes out and asks them, "Who is it you want?" And they say, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he comes back and he says once again, "I am he." Not only is this a statement of fact, but it is again the statement that says, "I'm the Messiah." This is a statement that says, "I am God." Judas is standing there, and when Jesus says, "I am he," the whole crew just sort of leans back, and then they fall to the ground. The power of Jesus' word knocked them to the ground. And again he asks them, "Who is it you want?" Now they've got two answers here. They can say Jesus of Nazareth, or they can say the Messiah. But they say Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answers it. It says, "I told you that I am he." It says, if you're looking for me, then let these men go. Let the disciples leave. And John points out that this was so that his previous prophecy would be fulfilled. "I've not lost one of those that you gave me." Simon Peter, prepared, he has a sword. He strikes it. You know how Simon is. He's always ready to act. He takes the sword. He struck the high priest's servant, cuts off his right ear. And it says here the servant's name was Malchus, which is an Arabic name. Now, in some of the other Gospels, Jesus then heals the ear immediately. But Jesus commands Peter to put his sword away. In this Gospel, he says, "Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" In other words, look, I've got to go through with this. If I'm to be arrested, so be it. So then they arrest and they bind Jesus, and they take him first to Annas. Now, Annas is the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Caiaphas is the current high priest. Now, if you remember your Old Testament, the high priest's office is a hereditary office. You are high priest for life, if you're high priest at all. But the Romans interfered. Annas had been high priest from the year 6 to the year 15, but he wasn't sufficiently pliable for the Romans, so the Romans began substituting in different people as high priest. And by this time, probably the year 33, they've gotten around to Caiaphas, who is Annas' son-in-law, and they've made him the official high priest. But you know, the people, the Jews, still thought of Annas as being the true high priest. Caiaphas, John reminds us, is the one who advised the Jewish leaders that it's better that one man die than the whole people. Well, Simon Peter and another disciple, we believe that was John, are following Jesus. And John is known to the high priest, so he's able to go into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter has to wait at the door. Besides, Peter's this kind of uncouth fisherman type, so they keep him at the door. John then goes back and speaks to the servant girl on duty and brings Peter in. The girl at the door asks Peter if he's one of the, are you one of the disciples? And Peter says, no, I'm not. His first denial. Now it's cold, and so Peter and servants and officials, they all stand around a fire in the courtyard there to keep warm. And the high priest, this is Annas, questions Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Notice he's asking him about his disciples, his teaching, theology, and the structure of his movement. Jesus says, look, just ask people what I taught. I always taught the same thing in the open as I did in private. One of the officials slaps Jesus in the face, though, thinks he's being too cheeky, and says, is this the way you answer the high priest? In one of the other Gospels, Jesus says something to the effect that I wasn't aware this was the high priest. But in this Gospel, he says, if I said something wrong, tell me what I said wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why are you striking me? Annas then sends him on to Caiaphas, his son-in-law, who is the official high priest now. Meanwhile, Simon Peter standing there around the fire, trying to keep warm, and they said, you aren't one of his disciples too, are you? And he says, no, I'm not. And then one of the high priest's servants, this is a relative of the man that Peter had cut the ear off of, challenged him, didn't I see you with him in the garden? He's thinking, hey, isn't this the guy who cut off my cousin's ear? And Peter denies it a third time. And at that moment, a rooster begins to crow. And if you'll remember back in the story, back in chapter 14, Jesus had predicted that Peter would deny him 3 times before the rooster crowed. In one of the other Gospels, Peter then leaves, weeps uncontrollably. The Jewish leaders take Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. And it's early morning. And now comes a little bit of the situation. It was against cleanliness rules, against purity rules for a Jewish priest to go into a Gentile's home. If he did that, he would be unclean for a period of time until he purified himself. So they could not enter the palace. Now this was inconvenient, and it was a source where the Romans could control them a bit, because Josephus, who was a Roman and Jewish general, tells us in his writings that they used to keep the robes for the high priest in the palace, in Pilate's palace, and only let them have them a week before. They needed a week to clean the robes, to purify the robes, before they could do a festival. Now, one of the things this did was this meant that the high priest could not suddenly come out in his regalia and make an announcement. No, he had to work a week ahead of time, and the Romans would know what was going on. Well, in this case, they can't enter the palace that morning because they want to be able to eat the Passover meal. They want to be pure enough that they can eat the Passover. So Pilate graciously comes out to them and says, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" They say, "Well, he's a criminal." And Pilate says, "Well, take him yourself and judge him yourself." And then they say, "But we've got no right to execute anyone." The Romans insisted in the lands that they conquered that only they could give capital punishment. Same thing goes on here in Jerusalem. The Jews are not allowed to give capital punishment. Only the Romans are. So they brought Jesus to Pilate because he's the only one that can pronounce a death sentence. So Pilate goes back inside the palace, calls Jesus into the palace, and asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus says, "That's your idea, or do others put that idea in your mind?" Pilate says, "I'm not a Jew. Your own people and the chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you've done?" And then Jesus talks about his kingdom. "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." And of course he is talking about the kingdom of God. That very diverse, dispersed kingdom where we have loyalty to Jesus over the loyalty to our own governments. Pilate says, "You are a king then." And you know, this is the first declaration by someone who says that Jesus is the king. Jesus says, "You say that I'm a king." He says, "The reason I was born and came into this world is to testify to the truth. And everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And Pilate, who's a politician, who has seen many things and listened to many different things in this world, says, "What is truth?" We're still having the same debate today. You listen to the news media and you have to decide what is truth. Jesus gives us the answer. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. That's what he said. "What is truth?" said Pilate. And then he goes out and says, "I've got no basis for a charge against the man, but I will release you one person because it's the custom to release a prisoner at Passover. You want me to release?" And then he calls him the King of the Jews. Doesn't say, "Do you want me to release this guy Jesus of Nazareth?" He says, "Do you want me to release the King of the Jews?" And the Jews say, "No, not him." They do not want their king. They want Barabbas. Barabbas was a man who had taken part in an uprising. Some translations call him a revolutionary. That's who they want. They do not want Jesus, who Pilate says is their king. Notice the irony through all this thing. Pilate's concern in all of this, his only real concern is there a rebel king here who challenges the emperor of Rome? That's all Pilate is really concerned about. He doesn't care about theology. He doesn't care about all these other things. He just cares, is there a rival king to the emperor? And in fact, he actually names him the king. How ironic. Well, that's chapter 18. We'll come back. Our next reading will be John 19, and I hope you'll join us.